Hi there, it's June the 13th, and today we are continuing our voyage through the book of 1 Kings, and we come to 1 Kings 11 and 12. And having seen this amazing story of Solomon in all his splendor and his wealth and wisdom and his relationship with God, suddenly things take a turn for the worse. And they take a turn for the worse for a very specific reason. We see that Solomon is unable to control his own lusts and desires. If he were alive today, we might well describe him as a sex addict. He has 700 wives and 300 mistresses, 300 concubines, and it seems that his passions just rule him. But there's something else about that. It's not just that he has a strong sex drive, it's also the fact that that leads him into idolatry. Anything that takes God's place in our lives is idolatry. And unfortunately, not only the women come, but because they are foreign women, because they're women of other religions, they bring their idols with them, and so Solomon actually takes on board their idols, their worship as well, which is a terrible thing. Now, it is probably the case that many of these wives, particularly, were to cement alliances and relationships politically. But often when these alliances were made, the condition was that they should also bring their gods with them. And so because of Solomon's passions, he lets in the idols. And so he builds temples and he builds shrines in Jerusalem for their gods, and things go very much downhill. And God has something very severe to say about this. He says, because you've done this, because you've gone after the Asherah, because you've gone after the foreign gods, I'm going to take the kingdom away from you. However, I will leave you with one tribe. I'm not going to do this, says God, in the days of your own reign, but I'm going to do it in the days of your son's reign. And it's a sad, sad outcome for this man who has seen so much of God's faithfulness, who's built the place where God meets with his people, but his passions rule him and run his life. We also see later in chapter 11 that God raises up enemies against Solomon to pursue him. There's Hadad, the king of Edom. At the time when Edom had been attacked by David after its rebellion and destroyed, Hadad managed to escape to Egypt and took refuge there. He returns and he starts to harry Israel. And then the other one is Rezon, and Rezon, he is an outlaw, but he finds favor with the people of Damascus and they make him king there. So suddenly Solomon is facing these, on his borders, these oppressions. And lastly, the one that is most serious is Jeroboam, or we call him Jeroboam. And Jeroboam is one of Solomon's servants. He's one of Solomon's workers for Solomon, and he actually organizes the forced labor. But one day, as he's working, as he's in the field, he is encountered by a prophet called Achiah the Shilonite, and Achiah says to him that he is going to take charge of 10 of the tribes, and he symbolizes this by taking Jeroboam's garment and tearing it into pieces and giving Jeroboam 10 of the pieces and saying that you're going to have 10 of the tribes that follow you. The chapter 11 finishes with the death of Solomon and telling us that, like his father, he reigned 40 years. So there's been 80 years of David's reign and of Solomon's reign. And then his son Rehoboam comes to the throne, or at least comes forward for being anointed. Now at this point, Jeroboam, who has been chased out of Israel, Solomon actually chased him away because he had heard of this prophecy that Jeroboam was going to be king. He tried to kill Jeroboam, but he managed to escape and get away. But Jeroboam comes back, and he leads the tribes of Israel at this point to come to Rehoboam and to say, what kind of reign is it going to be? Your father Solomon's reign was harsh on us, and we want to see that yoke lightened. And then Rehoboam takes advice, or at least he consults. And first of all, he consults with the elders, with the old men of the court. And they basically say, actually, if you serve the people, if you give yourself to service, if you lay yourself down for them, then you will have the people's hearts and they will go with you. But unfortunately, he listens to the younger men, his mates, the one who's grown up with him, and they basically say, be hard on them. If you don't establish power, then people won't respect you and they won't follow you. So tell them that if your father got them with whips, you will get them with scorpions. And so unfortunately, Rehoboam listens to them, and when Jeroboam comes at the head of the tribes a few days later, Rehoboam says, I am going to be a strong king. I am going to not just whip you, but scourge you with scorpions. And so Jeroboam leads the tribes of Israel. They say, we have no inheritance here. We have nothing to do with this Davidic dynasty. And they leave and they go and they create Jeroboam the king. So Rehoboam is left with one tribe, with the tribe of Judah. It's a terrible outcome as we finish our reading in verse 19 of chapter 12, that where there's been such amazing ascendancy of David and Solomon, because of Solomon's unfaithfulness and because of his passions, this has been the outcome, that the kingdom has been divided. And as we'll see, it continues in that way right up until the days of the fall and the exile. We need to be constantly guarding our hearts against those things which want to set themselves up against the honour of God. It can be anything. It can be relationships, it can be work, it can be substances, it can be materials, anything that takes God's place. That's why the first call on God's people was to put him first, to have no other gods before him. And no other gods doesn't just mean idols, doesn't just mean images. It can be anything that seeks to take his place. He is number one. He is one God. And if we want to really follow him and be serious about him and see blessing over our lives, we need to constantly be putting him in number one place. Have a very good June 13th.